Hi everyone, and welcome to today's seminar hosted by the International Inequalities Institute. My name is Michael Vaughan, and I'm a research fellow at the IAI. I'm really pleased to be chairing today's seminar, which is titled Then and Now, How Neighbourhood Deprivation in Youth Influences Attitudes Towards Inequality, which is part of the IAI Inequalities seminar series. So today's speaker is Franco Bonomi Bezzo. Franco is a postdoctoral researcher at Statale, University of Milan, within the ERC project DESPO, working on the political and societal changes that have occurred as a consequence of European deindustrialization. So can I ask the online audience to please keep yourself muted? As usual, there'll be the chance for you to pose questions following the presentation. So we'll take questions from both in-person and online audiences. So I'll hand over to Franco. Many thanks and enjoy the event.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to present this paper, which is a work in progress. As I was saying, the results are pretty stable throughout the production phase, which is good. But since none of us, so this is a photo paper with Laura Silva, which is actually here, and Annalisa Neu is the ERC PI on which I'm hired, and but none of us. We've been working for a long time on the UK, but none of us currently live in the UK, and so we thought this would be probably a good opportunity to get some feedback about if our explanations of the results, the mechanisms we devise are actually accurate, and so I think the more the comments you have, the better for us. And again, if you feel, I'm very happy if you want to interrupt me while I'm talking, or if you want to ask a question at the end of the presentation. So just really feel free about anything. First of all, the title is still preliminary. We're not very convinced about the title. So also about that, if there is any suggestion that makes it more interesting, that's very good. But yeah, so some background. On the ERC project, we are interested in analyzing this more meso-level determinants of inequality, and among them, the level like infrastructural and neighborhood inequality. And so last year we worked on a paper with Anne-Marie about neighborhood inequality, but just contextual neighborhood inequality, so where people actually live at the current time. And then we thought, but yeah, maybe it could be interesting also to look at where people grew up in, because there might be a more longitudinal aspect, more like life course approach to that. And so we said okay, let's have a look at that. So that's the background, the personal background story about why we thought about this paper. And then exactly, the problem is that inequality is rising. This is something we have been seeing more than in the world. And here, I think you are the greatest expert about that. And but it seems that public concern about this rising inequality is not really matching, and so it's not really rising. And so as far as inequality is legitimized, there might be less public support to fight inequality. And so there is some literature, quite consistent literature that shows that attitudes towards inequality can be important contestants of political outcomes in many different domains. So we have seen that there are papers looking at how much exposure to structural inequality increase the more holistic, systematic explanation of how it occurs. And also, and this is very interesting for our paper, there is literature showing that affluent individuals, given they have less exposure to structural constraints, are less likely to actually realize there is inequality and less likely to be worried about inequality. And also a second aspect which is interesting and which is really consistent with our story is that individual social mobility can actually let people think, okay, I deserved it. So inequality is not very much a concern for people who actually experience their mobility throughout their life. So, and this is linked perhaps to meritocracy explanations and so on. And what we found and what has been also discussed in the literature is that perhaps it could be that individual social mobility may lead more easily to actually internalizing this feeling compared to residential mobility, because it's more linked to your personal experience. So moving to the why it is interesting and why we think it is important, residential experience, we think that the neighborhoods and in different domains, from a cultural perspective, from an infrastructural perspective, are important and like strong meso-level agents of socialization. And so this is like due to like exposure to structural barriers, exposure to different peers, different communities. And so, as I said before, while we focused first on the current neighborhood, we thought it is, we think it is really important also to focus on the formative neighborhoods, so where people have grown up in. And so this is to aim to build a more composite personal history of mobility in space, and not only like across social classes.
I think you have to click back there.
It's great. It's here. Sorry. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so and then from like a theoretical framework, there is like there is this nice paper by Pat in 2014, which actually shows how attitudes towards inequality are formed, and it says that like they're formed on three different aspects. So one is the perception of existing inequalities, as imagined as like what is inequality. So is a subjective estimate about what is perceived as to be inequality. Then there is a belief about what is the fair inequality, which is more about normative ideas about what should be. And finally, it's more an evaluative judgment about the existing inequality and how good, how desirable is the current situation. So from like the question about like how does like the neighbor where you grew up in can affect inequality, there are like two mechanisms we've imagined and we've like theorized, and that's again something that we're very happy to receive comments about. So if it's not convincing or if it could be framed in a different way. So the first one is the transmission mechanism, which is more about beliefs and judgments. So it's about like it's formed through social interaction. So people actually engage with people. They meet other people. They meet their friends. The schools like parents of their friends. And so there is this interaction, this form of like conformity to the dominant norms. And then there is a more knowledge accumulation mechanism, which is about like it's something that you share with your peers, but about the physical environment you live in. So about where you are actually the structural barriers, the physical domain around you. So there is like one is more about like the beliefs, the personal beliefs and judgment you make about the society. Another one is more the perception of like how society is around you. In terms of data for this paper, we use data from two British cohorts. One of the people born in 1958, so then the NCDS, and so these are all people born in a single week in 1958, and then one other from the 1917 British cohort of all people born in a single week of 1970. I don't think, I mean, you probably all know the British cohorts very well. So, and for this paper, we consider information at age 16 and age 42. The problem with we would have loved to use information also before age 16, but there is no information about the neighborhood of residents before age 16. So that's we took this 2 points in time. And age 42 is because the questions are the same question are asked in both cohorts at the same age. So that's for comparability reasons, it seems like a good time. There's been so in Britain, we know there is a strong form of inequality and a great degree of special disadvantage from 1974 to 2012. And even if individual social mobility has increased and has been on the rise. So looking at the life of these people in our sample, if you look at the people that were born in 1958, they turned 16 in 1974. and then they were 42 in 2000. And so they spend their like more formative years under like labor governments with like expansive welfare policies, and so it's a society which was probably emphasizing more this egalitarian approaches and to society and this more welfare expansion phase. Conversely, people born in the 1970 were turned 16 in 1986, and they grew up under the more aggressive phase of Thatcher government in a phase that therefore of welfare cuts, market-led approaches, which was more focused towards meritocracy and individualism. So again, we consider information at this 2-point time, and we use the 1000 index of deprivation at the LSE level. So neighborhoods which contain in between 1,000 to 2,000 people. The reason why we use the 1000 index instead of like other more refined that are currently available, like the IMD, is because it's to go back in time is the only index which is available. So there is attrition, and we've been discussing a long time about that and like how to deal with attrition. So there are some. So there's the data on the CLS as actually they suggested there's multiple imputation for the 1958 cohort, but there is not a standard procedure for the 1970 cohort. So we started doing with the 1958 cohort, but then we said like, yes, but then it's going to be incomparable with the 1970. Then we said, okay, let's check how bad is attrition. From what we have seen is that like the sample is slightly more composed of women and individuals from medium-high social economic classes than the original population, but that's not too much. That doesn't affect too much the results. And probably, given also previous papers using the same data, this attrition bias, we think, might lead to an underestimation of neighborhood effects over time instead of anything else. So the way we thought about proceeding is that, okay, we are aware of attrition. We are not treating attrition with multiple imputation. We just are aware that the sample is slightly more composed of women, for example, and individuals from medium-sized social economic classes. But that's to keep in mind with the interpretation of the results. So in terms of different variables, we use 4 different questions from at age 42. We call them with this maybe weird names. So we're happy for them to be reframed in a different way. So the first one, it's about people answer from 1 to 5, so on a 5-point scale, about government should redistribute income from completely disagree to completely agree. Then the second one is big business benefits owners at the expense of workers. The third one is about social justice. There is one law for the rich and one law for the poor. And finally, about education, private schools should be abolished. We construct an index, a composite index ranging from 0 to 1 of all these 4 variables through factor analysis, and which we call attitudes towards inequality. So we will see we have like 4 individual variables plus the composite index. As I said, like the talent in deprivation index contains information about unemployment share, the share of population to be unemployed in the neighborhood, people owning a car, people owning their home, and household overcrowding, and we measure it at both age 16 and age 42. We then use a parental social class, and as a third step, we design residential mobility trajectory, which we define. So we define 4 possible trajectories, which is like stable affluent, downward mobility, upward mobility, and stable deprived. And for both neighbor mobility and social class mobility, we consider like as affluent the 3 top categories, and as more deprived the bottom 2 categories. And for social class mobility, we use it like the 3 top social classes, while for neighbor mobility, we pick the 3 top quintiles of the 1000 index, and so the rest, I guess, it's so people have been always in the top 3, people have always been in the top in the bottom 2, and people were moved upward, downward, or upward. that's very blurred. But yeah, basically it's just we just run OLS models at age 42, comparing across the two cohorts and comparing origin and contemporary determinants. And again, like as I said, like between the effect of residential mobility as compared to social class mobility. We control for sex, ethnicity, parental education on both sides, income, tenure, educational attainment, employment status, marital status, overall health, occupation, and region. We tried removing parental education because we thought maybe when we look at the social class, this could affect our results, and nothing changes. Right. So here about the results. We have the four outcomes plus the composite index. And we reverted the 1000 deprivation index, calling it the neighborhood affluence. And what we find is that, so these are for the 1958 cohort. Basically, just to interpret the results, a one standard deviation in increase in neighborhood affluence at age 16 leads to around decrease by around 4 percentage points attitudes against inequality. Living in a one standard deviation more affluent neighborhood at age 42 decreased by around 10 percentage points attitudes against inequality at age 42. And look at the individual outcomes, we see like the neighborhood affluence is slightly more has a larger effect on all different outcomes, but still even the neighborhood affluence at age 16 is still very relevant, especially on social justice and on capitalism. So living in more affluent areas let people be less against inequality growth. When we look at parental social class, and that's probably the more surprising result, more interesting result for us, in the 1958 cohort, we almost don't see any significance. And on the composite index, not at all. There is a slight significance, but like social justice, but nothing really significant. Moving to the 1970 cohort, the results are not that different when you look at neighborhood affluence, but they do change looking at parental social class. In fact, parental social class seems to matter much more. So being the reference category here is our unskilled occupation, so people from the lower social classes, and being from like a top social class decrease, like having parents from a top social class decreases attitudes against inequality by quite considerably. Yeah. So moving to the trajectories, the results are very similar. So here we have both in the same slide, both the 1958 and the 1970 cohort. And what we see is that like the reference category here is a stable affluent. So people who have always been who have always lived in the top category. And what we can see is that people living in who have always been stable deprived are much more against inequality. People who have experienced a downward mobility, again, are much more against inequality, but also people who have been going upward are more against inequality. Conversely, when you look at social class mobility, yeah.
Sorry, just so this effect are all positive, no?
Yeah.
So which means that with respect to the stable, all the other categories
are more against inequality.
Are more against inequality.
For neighborhood.
So there is a non-linearity in this. I mean,
yeah.
If you experience downward mobility,
yeah,
you are less adverse to inequality.
Then yes, exactly. Then people will always
because you think you deserve it. I don't believe it, but I just ask for clarification.
Yeah. I mean, maybe just. I mean, this result to me is not too surprising because, like, you grew up in an affluent neighborhood, and then you end up living in a more deprived neighborhood. Mm-hmm. Then you are more afraid of neighborhood inequality, of inequality in general. So you are more against inequality. I don't know. That's that. But I mean, but again, maybe it's a personal.
But if it's true, how do you explain that upward is more than stable?
this for me is because like people who have grown up they might still have like friends or relatives who are still living in less affluent areas, so they share this experience of scarcity, and therefore they still have this feeling that inequality is bad, and you then it's less easy. While if you experience if it's on a personal scale, you internalize it as a meritocracy with true meritocracy explanation. So I deserved to come here. So like I don't really care about inequality. While for neighbor inequality, it's more collective domain. So you really have this. So the difference for me lies in the collective nature of neighborhood as compared to social classes. But yeah.
Also, you can only move up if you're down to begin with, right? So I think that's sort of, pushed along. So I was just going to say, so Andrew McNeil, who's associated with the Institute, he's got a really nice paper where he does something similar, but he uses the diagonal reference model to sort of try and tease out some of these effects. So I'll send it to you.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, we thought about the diagonal reference model about that, but the reason why we didn't use it is that because the way we define because in that case you have a problem if you that's my understanding. Maybe I'm wrong, so I might to read the paper better. But from my understanding, the diagonal reference model is very useful when you have moving from category 1 to 2 could be different from moving from category 2 to 3. So if you have more than one possible move, then it's problematic and you need to use that one. But given that here we are just comparing people to move up or down, I don't think the results would really change because you don't have like that the jump is more significant for a certain category than for the other. I don't know if this makes sense.
Reread the paper.
Well, maybe I'm wrong because I got a similar comment when presenting at Sciences Po in November, and then I went to have a look at that, and then I felt like, but does it really change the way because we are not saying that moving by one category is more relevant than moving by two categories. We're just saying that going up or down or remaining on the same level of deprivation or affluence is not the same. So yeah, but yeah, thank you very much. I mean, I think probably we should somehow deal with it. So yeah, coming back here, like what we see here is that the total class mobility. So upper mobility doesn't show any doesn't seem to be more against inequality than people who have been always in the more affluent category. While, for example, the stable low and the downward especially in the 1958 are more against inequality, while especially in the 1970 cohort, those who have experienced downward social class mobility are much more against inequality than those who have always been in a stable high social class. So this is to show and I don't know, maybe this could go slightly more in the direction of your point. So basically here we have neighborhood affluence at age 16 in both diagrams. This is for the 1958 and that one is for the 1970. And we can see that and we have here, so it's people who are currently living in a low affluent neighborhood, while the small dots are those who currently they for sure live in an affluent neighborhood. And the gap in attitudes against inequality between those who currently live in low versus high affluent neighborhoods is much larger, and the gap widens even more for the 1970 cohort for those who have grown up in high affluent neighborhoods. So if you've grown up in a high affluent neighborhood, the difference between, I mean, it's really big, the gap between those who currently live still in an affluent neighborhood, those who live in a poor area. And we think that it's very interesting that the way the gap becomes much larger for the 1970 cohort as compared to the 1958 cohort, but still the pattern is quite similar. So just to conclude, maybe very early, but yeah. So what we think that this paper suggests that meso-level biographical experiences are important determinants of attitudes towards inequality, and that the formative neighborhood and not only the current neighborhood really matters as in the formation of attitudes against inequality. And what we see and what so it's important is that like upward residential mobility remains relevant in contrast to social class. And our explanation, as I said before, is that it might be, we speculated, it might be that it's more likely that people that experience like social class mobility explain it as through meritocratic channels linked to their personal experience. So overall, I think this paper it should encourage, and hopefully will encourage, more life course approaches to the study of neighborhood and residential mobility beyond the individual level analysis that are currently approached in this way. And yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you, Franco. So we've got a good amount of time for questions now, which is excellent. So I'll open the floor to questions. If you are online, you can use the raise hand function to put your question or paste your question into the chat, stating your name and affiliation where possible. So first, let's look to the room and see if there are any questions here.
Thanks for the presentation. I think it's quite interesting what you guys are doing, and I liked it quite a lot. I have a bit of a question about the concept, how you conceptualize social status and the mobility in social status, because you said these 4 categories, right? Like it's upward if you move from one category to the other and stuff like that. But these categories, are they defined at the neighborhood level or are they defined at the national level? Because if then you are looking at neighborhood inequalities, but you are taking the reference point, the national kind of level, then you are kind of biasing the estimations, right? Because I might decide to move from one neighborhood to the other, because where I am, or like, I may be in a lower class in my neighborhood, and then I move to another neighborhood that is more deprived in general, but in that neighborhood, my social status compared to my neighbors is higher. So I would be experiencing upward mobility in that sense. But since if it's defined at the national level, you would take it as not experiencing upward mobility. I don't know if that makes sense.
I'm unsure about like what do you mean by defined at the national level?
I mean, at the end, the classes you have to define it at some level. The 5th social class for the whole country, or just
just like so basically in both cohorts. The people respond to a 5 category question about their own social class.
Okay.
Yeah. So basically, it's individual social class at like at age 16 and age 42.
But it's a self-defined social class.
Sorry.
A self-defined.
Yes. Yes. But I see your point about you mean the relative standing of your social class within the neighborhood. That's probably. Yeah.
Again, interaction, you could show.
Yeah, we tried interactions, and they are not significant at all. So we tried interaction between the social class and neighborhood deprivation or affluence, whatever it's framed, and there is nothing significant. So you don't see any interaction there. I mean, I thought that they're exactly the same, and that probably solves somehow your point. But
I don't know, because if you're defining your social status alone, then you may think that you are a high social class when you are not really, just because the people that are around you are worse off than you.
Yeah, but that's linked to your occupation. So it's more about class. Yeah, I mean, it's
of course. But if I live in a neighborhood where everybody is a farm worker, just like me.
But you're defined as a farm worker. Like you're not. You don't. So you're considered in that social class.
Yeah.
So it's not a subjective social class measure.
Okay.
Okay. But yeah.
I think you raised your hand, but maybe I can't because Valentina used the word interactions. That is what have been in my mind as well during your your presentation of the results. So it seems that your social class and your neighborhood do interact in your perception of inequality, no? Because if you, I mean, this is telling you whether you are one of the rich in your neighborhood or one of the poor. So I mean, I would really feel that the interaction part should be there somewhere. I mean, because otherwise, I mean, you have shown us a number of non-significant coefficients, no? So so one should show all the non-significant coefficients that are theoretically theoretically have a reason to be there. I mean, it's an information. This doesn't seem to. You have 9,000 observations, 6,500 observations. So you have quite a bit of degree of freedom that you can try to use.
No, I mean, we were not really afraid of showing the no result of the interaction. It was more about that we didn't. No, I guess I agree that it's more about that we didn't know exactly. Okay, but then the interaction is not significant. Which is what is exactly? There is not this mechanism at play. So we thought about like what's the explanation for the no results of the. Is it really? It's meaningful, but from your comments, I guess it is. So probably we should bring it back.
Because what you show could be the composition of a different effect, of different mix of people, different type in different neighborhood. In the end, if you don't have an interaction term, it could be that what you see is simply the composition of effect that do have an explanation. So you have a risk of biased results not including interactions. But this depends on the mechanism you have in mind. If the mechanism is when I perceive inequality, I compare myself to what is around me, then you need the interaction. If you say what I want to explain, so to me the theory is that I remember my situation when I was 16, and I perceive based on what I have around, but it doesn't. What I got in the end at 42 doesn't play a role. I mean, to me, it's part of your theory. It's test.
No, I agree. No, but also like when we added the interaction term, the interaction was not significant. The results were exactly the same.
No, that's okay. That's a plus. I mean.
No, exactly. But I see it. Thanks.
Okay, so we've got Bea, Mike, and Shalini.
I was going to say that.
Oh, okay.
So can I ask the same point then?
Yes.
It's just that like I find it difficult to believe that if two people come from like bad neighborhoods and they both become, I don't know, doctors, and one moves to a rich neighborhood and the other one stays in the bad neighborhood, they wouldn't have different views about inequality. Like you are really confronted to different, like you see different things, right? Like
yeah, but in the end you do have different. And the result should I mean in the interview is like okay
And I don't know, like I know you say you already checked, but maybe it's not just interacting it in the sense of like how do you run those interactions one month?
And the combination.
Okay. Mike?
Thank you. Yes. So I'm a sociologist and have thought a lot about class. And if I understand your analysis correctly, you're using the Registrar General's approach to class. That has not been used for 30 or 40 years by sociologists. You should be using the Goldthorpe's approaches, the NSEC, the National Statistics, socioeconomic classification. And we analysed these surveys and said there'd be an easy way of encoding it, but I would seriously urge you not to use the Registrar General approach. It's not very valid.
Can I just add to Mike's? And I agree. Can I just add to Mike's, because I'm an anthropologist, and I think your conclusion is just, for me, just too obvious that you have to add the life course. That's something that would be so normal and obvious to the kind of research that we do in the social sciences. The other problem I have is that your notion of inequality for me is in a vacuum. I get no understanding here of gender, of race, of ethnicity. I get no, these intersectional inequalities are what makes inequality so serious and deep. So I'm just, I'm not getting any sense here of a much more a pluralistic kind of inequality. It's in a vacuum for me.
Yeah. Shall I?
If you'd like to.
Yeah. No, just one point about. So basically, yeah, it's true. Like we do use the Register General. I was looking at because like I had like this information here, and we use the Register General social class. And the problem with that, so then from my understanding, until the 80s, they were the standard measures probably in the UK. And then in the 90s, they were the NSEC, they were created, right? So we started the beginning with using, because in both cohorts you have the SEG, but then the categories were always changing across waves. And so we said, like, okay, given that like the Register General social class was a standard measure until the 1980s, and we are using like people born in the 1958, 1970, then why not using that? Yeah, so
on that, you're absolutely right. They did change their approach, but the 58 survey has been recoded for the newer NSF, so you can fairly easily.
So you'd stick to you think it would be anyway better to just move to the NSEC?
Yeah, so registrar general is not used by any more by sociologists, because particularly the class 3, the skill is just a huge category which includes skilled manual workers and white collar workers, and it's NSEC is a 7-class measure. Yeah. In general, I'm not very sympathetic to it. You see, it's it's the one which is used by ONS, and it's very short one.
And about I mean, no, you're definitely right. Like there are so many other determinants of inequality in the story. Is that like as soon as you start adding more things, and we already have neighborhood, you have social class, you have the trajectories. So we thought it was becoming a bit too complex to put everything in one.
So you think that gender, which is the most profound of inequalities, is too basic to add on?
I mean, I don't think it's too basic. I just think that we are not actually focusing on that in this paper, because just we are more looking at the meso level aspect than at the individual or intersectional nature like gender and ethnicity. But I'm not to downplay the role of gender, which is definitely one of the most serious causes of inequality. I mean, it was more about the way the focus of the paper was more towards the meso level than the individual level.
Could you not nuance and texture this towards something that will be much more valuable for your readers?
Did you want to continue on that point, or we have some online questions?
I have a different point.
Okay, so first we might go online, and then we'll come to Annette. So Santiago, I can see your hand raised if you'd like to go.
Yes, hello. Putting my video on. Well, hi, thank you for your presentation. I liked your perspective on the place to look for an explanation. I think it's a bold paper. I like that very much, the comparison between the both cohorts. But I think that comparison is lost a little bit at the end. Like I think that could be more taken and recontextualize more like each case with the labor thing and the Thatcher thing, like the context. And I wanted to ask, like, why the decision to pick 16 and 42 as the ages to check on them, and what else in the historical context years, like 72 was
Yes,
okay.
almost last year.
Year later was the crisis, but so that my idea, like if you can contextualize like with the historical facts, well, like historically, like that was the thing is missing. Well, thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. That's no, that's a very good point. And I think probably at the current stage, we are definitely refining more this aspect and also in the explanation of the results. And yes, probably like I didn't really present much of this in this presentation. While yeah, I think it's an important terminal to explain the results. Yeah, thank you very much.
Okay, great. And
It's an interesting paper. I'm also a sociologist. I wonder if you have data on the number of moves that people have and where they go. So in the US, the research shows a lot of poor people end up just going to other poor neighborhoods. But I mean, I do qualitative work, but it looks like you have 15,000 cases. And childhood, the first 5 years of life is often seen as very powerful in development and views. And I wondered about if you had the data. I mean, 15. You don't know their neighborhood when they're little?
Unfortunately, we don't know it. You might correct me if I'm wrong. We don't have it for sure in the 1958, but not even for the 1970s, right? So we don't have it for the 1958 for sure. So we said like to make it comparable, we just keep it at age 16. But yes, ideally, I mean, and the original idea was to start with like the formative period before age 16. But yes, we don't have this information about the moves. Given that the waves are not every year, so we could have the number of moves, and perhaps build. So do you think like if we have 6 waves between age 5 waves between age 16 and age 42, do you think would are you thinking about like a composite exposure, like cumulative exposure to deprivation, something like that, or is this?
I mean, within the poor in the US, there's often a group of people who have persistent, deep poverty for kids. And those kids often don't do as well as kids who or just go in and out of poverty in a moment. And so, thinking a little bit more among the poor and where they live and where they go, I mean, it might or might not make a difference.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Liz.
Thank you for the presentation. I've got a couple of questions and maybe just comments. So for clarification, with your neighbourhood definitions of affluence and pride, do you at any point control for inequality within the neighbourhood? Or have you looked at inequality within the neighbourhood? So if you've got I presume it's on average level of affluence, you may have a neighbourhood that is entirely affluent, or a neighbourhood that is actually quite varied in its level of affluence. And I couldn't see whether or not you've looked at that.
We unfortunately don't have any information about inequality at the neighbor level. We just especially from the 1958 and 1970, we only have information about the neighbor through the 1000 deprivation index.
So my colleague Joel has done he might be online. He's done some really interesting work about the impact of sort of local area inequality on attitude. He's done some really interesting work again with the values of house prices to estimate local area inequality. So you might want to look at that to see if there's a way that you could estimate the level of inequality within the neighbourhood. And then secondly, I just wondered whether or not you'd considered the political, how that area votes is what I'm thinking. Yeah. A conservative area might have conservative schools, conservative attitudes versus a Labour area, and those have been fairly distinct over time. And I think you could get quite interesting
result that you accounted for that. But again, I couldn't see that in your control. So I was just wondering if both of those are more sort of me not sure if I'm not following, or just comments to maybe think about the future.
But that's very good. I think the problem with so the first one about inequality, then I have to look at your colleagues' work, because I'm not aware of any data about inequality, especially in the currently, yes, but in the past I don't know, but maybe so I missed it. And about political, the problem is that like the LSE are not really matchable with electoral districts.
No, but they could be matched to electoral districts. And I mean, that data will be available for quite a long time.
Yeah, but then they would be grouped. You'd go, the size of them would be larger, again, because the LSE is much smaller than any electoral district, as far as I know. But maybe you could say that you could do that. We could do the analysis at a different level, more at the electoral ward level.
Well, you could keep your neighbourhood at this level and have a control for it. It's district. Okay.
Yeah.
Can I jump in actually, because I wanted to follow on from something that Liz said about kind of local heterogeneity, and my question was about what the appeal was in talking about neighbourhood mobility instead of thinking about like with a sort of different mechanism imagined for downward and upward neighbourhood mobility, rather than kind of heterogeneity of exposure to information across a life trajectory. Because at least the literature that I've read most talks about the kind of explanation for support for meritocracy being confined to homogeneous reference groups. And so in this sense, this might kind of go some way to explaining why there are positive effects for every movement, both downward and upward, because what you're capturing is exposure to different heterogeneous local neighborhood contexts, if that makes sense.
I'm not sure I got your point.
Okay. My point is essentially when you're imagining the effect of neighborhood mobility, I wonder why you chose neighborhood mobility as the thing that would have an effect, rather than exposure to different levels of inequality, irrespective of direction over a life course.
Yeah. That's a good point. Maybe we should actually talk more about the reasons behind that. I guess this lays in my overall interest in neighborhoods and like in meso levels, which can both be cultural or more physical, or more like cultural meso levels. But then probably this would always, I mean, that's a good point. I don't have a reason behind about the why, and but I could reflect more about it. Yeah, no, that's a good suggestion. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah. Oh.
Well, mine is a very minor clarification question, because maybe I lost it. So when you're measuring the neighborhood affluence, is it at a given point in time, or a neighborhood can change across time? So it can be affluent, let's say, when we were 16, but then it less affluent, but then it can become more affluent.
It could be both between and within variation, and the neighborhood could become better or worse.
So you take that into account?
Yes, because like you control for Thanks.
I wanted just to add up on the exclusion of gender among regressors, because I think it's not only a problem of gender being a driver of inequality. I mean, one root causes of inequality being the barriers to gender equality, but also what I read in the economic literature is that women tend to perceive differently inequality and have a different attitude toward the distribution. So, for example, if you assume that this is the case also for your variables, and that women have a lower probability of moving upward, which is maybe likely to be the case as well, then your results are biased because you are not controlling for gender. So I mean, I would really stress on the need to control.
We do control for gender.
Oh, okay.
No, we do control for sex and ethnicity. So we are not ignoring.
It's significant gender.
Let me see. I don't think I have the full table here. No, but that's not that it's true.
No, that's statistics.
Oh wait, I just have it here. I just running today. Yes.
It is.
Yeah, it is either.
And negative.
There. For both.
More negative for older cohorts.
More negative for the younger cohort.
Okay, thanks.
Like. No, but that's why I'm saying like we could. We don't ignore it. It's definitely a relevant aspect. We just don't focus and don't explain that. Focus our attention on explaining there is difference by sex or ethnicity. I think maybe we even tried. I don't remember. No, but yeah. So we.
Have I missed any questions online or in the room? Okay, last, Neil.
How much do you think this is the British story? Because there must be other literature on this. I'm just wondering, because we have quite high spatial inequality, we have sort of relatively low we have very high pro-inequality attitudes as well. I mean, there must be other studies which look at similar things in other countries. Do you feel like this is a British set of results, or do you think this is?
I mean, we haven't found. I mean, there is definitely literature in the US about life course approaches to inequality, and but I mean life course approaches to neighborhood mobility, but as far as I know, not really about how much neighborhood trajectories affect the formation of attitudes towards inequality in other countries. So I haven't come across of any other people in other contexts doing the same thing. And I think it's partially due also to that you need some specific data about that to this kind of analysis, and not in many countries you have this kind of data. But I don't like. I think that the comparison between cohorts that grew up during Thatcher and during the more expansive phase of the Labour government can be really specific of the British society, and can really explain quite a big part of the story. But yes, obviously, ideally, I would love to expand this work to other countries. I work a bit more on mostly in the UK, and then about Italy and France, and there are no data at all about that in these two countries, so I couldn't really. We can't really do in the direction. But yeah, but I'm not aware of any other study about that in other countries.
So we're trying to do a Swiss study, and it's a complete waste of time. There's no variation.
Yeah. You have data about neighborhood mobility.
So not quite neighborhood, like local area.
Local, but local, how local?
Not nearly as local as neighborhood.
Okay. Because that's the problem we have. Like, we got lost about this definition of like meso level, like how different meso levels apply to different outcomes, and I think we could open a big discussion about that. But I think, especially for this like attitudinal outcomes, I think the smaller you can get, the better it is, because what really is the cultural environment around you that really can affect you, and it should be very locally under my perspective. Like, I think if you have like I don't know, in the UK, if you have the MSA or the local authority level, then you'd probably lose much of variation. While, for example, like for labor markets, going at the LSE level doesn't really make sense. You should probably go up to the local authority or other larger. So
the problem with neighborhood level is that you're mixing in lots of sorting effects, which sort of complicate the sort of. But actually, it occurs to me quite interesting to just plug in the local authority unemployment data from these periods and see if that see what that does to your coefficients.
Yeah.
Which we have. I mean, it's very easy to do.
Yeah.
Okay. Any final thoughts? Laura, I don't know if you had anything you wanted to share as well?
No, I think I'm fine.
Okay.
Thanks for all the comments. I think this is great, brilliant to definitely check out to things. Everybody.
Fantastic. Well, okay, so please join me in thanking Franco and Laura and their team and some of them.